Today, we're going to be looking into something that sounds, well, kind of simple on the surface, the air gap. This idea that we can keep, like, the really important stuff, the crown jewels, so to speak, offline.
Yeah.
Locked away safe and sound. Sounds pretty foolproof, right?
You'd think so, yeah.
But as we're about to find out, not so fast.
Not so fast.
We're doing a deep dive today into a new white paper, actually. It's from ESET Research.
Okay.
And it's called Jumping the Air Gap, 15 Years of Nation-State Effort.
And, well, let's just say, it gets pretty real.
Definitely does.
The thing is, right, they looked at a lot of attacks, actual real-world breaches, not just theory. And get this, every single one they analyzed.
Every single one.
Every single one came down to something you probably have, like, in your desk drawer right now.
Let me guess.
The trusty USB drive.
It's always the USB.
It is. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of how these attacks work, I gotta ask, when is the last time you actually thought about the security risks of a plain old USB drive? It's funny, right? You picture, like, James Bond stuff, high-tech,
Right.
But in reality, it's often way more low-tech than that.
So ESET, in their research, they break these attacks down into two main frameworks, connected and offline.
Two flavors of air gap jumping.
Exactly. So help us understand, what's the difference between the two?
Okay, so picture, like, a spy movie, right?
Okay. I'm with you.
The spy wants to get a message to someone inside a secure facility.
Classic.
That's kind of like the connected framework. They get access to a system that is online, maybe through, like, a phishing email, weak password.
Right. Something like that.
And they use that to slip some malware onto a USB drive. That drive becomes the bridge.
So across the area.
Across the air gap. Boom.
So they're using that connected system as a launch pad into the more secure one.
Exactly.
Clever.
The offline way is more old school. It relies on someone physically getting into the air-gapped network.
So like an insider threat.
Could be, yeah. Or a careless employee. Or someone they tricked into carrying that USB drive for them.
Wow. Social engineering.
Social engineering at its finest.
It's crazy, right? This little thing we all have lying around.
Right, yeah.
Becomes this incredibly potent weapon.
And that's why it works. People just, they don't think twice. We use them all the time.
Totally. Plug it in, plug it out, no big deal, right?
Right. And we move between our work computers, our home laptops. I've even seen people use them on public computers, and you just think,
oh, no.
Yeah.
Not good. Not good at all.
And just like that, an attacker can ride along, right past all those security checkpoints.
Into the supposed fortress.
Exactly.
So the paper gives some pretty unsettling real-world examples, like Stuxnet.
Oh, yeah, Stuxnet, a classic.
That was what, like 2010?
Around then, yeah. And it combined a technical vulnerability with that human element we just talked about.
So how did it work?
Okay, so there was this flaw in Windows. And this flaw, it let Stuxnet basically auto-run. You plug in the infected drive and bam!
Infected.
It was running before you even knew it hit you.
Wow. Sneaky.
But it gets even sneakier.
Oh, there's more.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They use this system file, shell32.dll, disguise themselves as part of the system itself.
So it was hiding in plain sight.
Hiding in plain sight.
That's impressive. In a bad way, obviously.
Right. And this whole deception thing, it's a recurring theme. Another example, PlugX.
Okay, what did PlugX do?
This one's wild. You plug in the USB and it looks empty.
Empty. Empty. So, like, nothing there.
Nothing there.
Okay.
But then you see what looks like normal folders.
Right. You think it's just like, accidentally empty?
Exactly.
When you click on a folder?
And boom, malware.
It's like it's playing on your expectations. You expect to see stuff.
Exactly. We're creatures of habit.
So USB's clearly a weak point. But I'm guessing those aren't the only way to dump an air gap.
You're right. The ESET paper does mention other methods, like going after network services, finding holes there.
Right, exploiting weaknesses.
Or even those zero-day exploits.
Which are?
Vulnerabilities no one knows about yet.
So like the nuclear option of hacking?
Pretty much. But they're rare. Think about it.
Valuable.
Very valuable. Once you use it, everyone knows about it, and then it's useless.
So the fact that we don't see them that often actually...
But it means the low-tech stuff is still working really, really well.
Which is kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
Kind of terrifying.
Okay, so we've talked about how this stuff gets in, but what happens once it's there? What are these attackers actually doing inside an air-gapped network?
Right. You'd think, right, it's the big climax. Systems crashing, data being wiped, sirens blaring.
Meltdown mode.
Yeah. But in reality, it's a lot more subtle. most of the time, we're not talking about, like, blowing things up.
Okay, so less about destruction. Way less. It's about espionage. Information gathering. Think of it more like they want to be invisible. Quietly collecting, slipping away without a trace.
So not so much bringing systems down, but more like
Yeah.
stealing secrets.
Exactly. And it sounds kind of boring, right? Like, oh, they're just copying files.
Yeah, a little bit.
But trust me, the way they do it, incredibly sophisticated stuff.
All right, so convince me. What makes it so complex? How is this malware actually working once it's jumped the air gap?
Okay, so ESET's paper, they highlight a few big things. Persistence, for one.
Persistence, meaning
A malware's got to stick around, right? You can't just, like, grab something and run.
it needs to stay hidden.
Exactly. It needs to survive reboots, avoid the security software, the whole 9 yards.
How does it do that?
Well, one way is the Windows registry. Hiding in plain sight, kind of.
Remind me, the registry is.
It's like the giant control panel for Windows, deep system stuff. Most people never even see it.
Okay, so a good place to hide if you don't want to be found.
Exactly. Though some malware, it gets way more creative.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Flame. This one was nuts. It pretended to be a core system component, called itself a security support provider.
Hold on. It was impersonating part of the security system.
Yep.
That's bold.
Incredibly difficult to detect, right? Security tools, they're designed to ignore those essential parts.
That's very clever in a, evil genius kind of way.
Right. Okay, so they're hidden. Next up, recon.
Recon, like scouting the area.
Exactly. They don't always know what they've got, right? What system they're on, what else is connected. So they gather intel.
Sneaky.
USB stealer, for example, it would check for things like internet access or try to find specific files, encryption keys, stuff like that.
So they're targeted. It's not just grabbing everything in sight.
Oh, absolutely. Some of them are very specific. Gauss, ever heard of it?
Rings a bell, maybe.
This one used fingerprint encryption. It was designed to target one specific machine, and only that machine, out of an entire network.
Wow. That's, they really knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
Who their target was.
And get this. The final payload, what Gauss was actually supposed to steal, still mystery, undeciphered.
They have no idea.
No.
That's kind of spooky, honestly. All right, so the malware's in. It's hidden. It's figured out what it wants.
Yeah.
Now it's got to get that data back out, right?
Exactly. Exfiltration. And this part, again, super clever stuff. Ramsey.
Go on.
This one used steganography, hiding data in plain sight.
Wait, like invisible ink stuff?
Kinda, except digital. Ramsey would take the stolen data and hide it inside normal files, like Word docs, PDFs.
Wait, so a file could look completely normal,
Totally normal.
but be full of stolen data. How is that even possible?
It's all about how files are structured, right? There's these little unused spaces. Ramsey would tweak those spaces, store the data there, and the file size wouldn't even change.
So it's like a secret compartment in the file.
Exactly. And security tools, they're less likely to flag a boring old Word doc, right?
Sneaky, sneaky, sneaky. Okay, I gotta say, I'm starting to feel a little uneasy here, knowing all this stuff is out there. Working on these seemingly harmless USB drives.
Right.
Sneaking into these supposedly secure systems. So the big question is there any hope?
Oh, there's always hope.
Can we actually defend against these air gap attacks, or is it just a matter of time?
Well, it requires a mindset shift. Like 100% perfect air gap security.
Right.
Probably impossible.
In the real world.
Exactly.
Okay.
But we can make it way harder, raise the cost of doing business, so to speak.
So less about making it impossible, more about making it not worth it.
Exactly. Make it so difficult, so expensive for the attacker. They just move on.
Okay, so it's like that Fort Knox analogy, right?
There you go.
Layers upon layers of security.
Exactly.
But where do you even begin? I mean, if something as small as a USB drive can be weaponized,
Right.
it feels like an uphill battle.
It's about layers, right. And some of it, honestly, is just good old-fashioned security hygiene.
Okay, so back to basics.
Sometimes, yeah, like restrict email access. Sounds simple, but
It's often overlooked.
big time. Especially on systems that, even if they are connected, they don't need, like, full-blown internet access.
Right. If you're working with sensitive stuff, or
Yeah.
especially if you're dealing with those air gap systems,
Limit that email access.
makes sense.
What else? USB hygiene. Cannot stress this enough.
So like sanitizing those drives?
Oh, yeah, before they even get close to anything important. Rigorous scanning, cleaning processes.
And those LNK files, right, auto run stuff. We were talking about that earlier.
Huge. ESET found that over 70% of the attacks they looked at
Wow.
used those for either getting in or spreading around once they were inside.
So a simple thing
Simple.
to make a huge difference.
Exactly. Like you lock your front door,
Yeah.
right? It's not going to stop a really determined burglar,
Right.
but it's a deterrent.
Makes them work harder.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got email restrictions, USB hygiene.
What about what they can actually run from those external drives?
Oh, you're talking about like whitelisting applications?
Exactly. Instead of just letting any old program launch, you have a list of what's allowed. Anything else, blocked.
Right, so something like Ramsey hiding in a Word doc.
Done.
Love it. Okay, now what about keeping those systems up to date? That seems tricky with an air gap.
It is tricky, but here's the thing. Trying to stay safe by staying offline can actually backfire.
How so?
Updates, patches, you fall behind, and suddenly you're vulnerable to stuff everyone else patched months ago.
Right, like those end-day vulnerabilities we talked about.
Exactly. And ESET found those were really common in these air gap attacks.
So you're saying even those isolated systems, they need to be updated somehow.
Safely, securely. Maybe you temporarily bridge the gap in a very controlled environment,
Right.
but it's got to happen.
It's like a necessary risk almost.
Kinda, yeah. It's
Yeah.
a balance, right? Maintaining that isolation, but also acknowledging that software, it evolves.
It's constantly changing.
Always.
Okay, so we've got our technical defenses.
Yeah.
But we can't forget the human element, right?
Ah, the human factor.
Yeah.
Never underestimate it.
Because even with the best tech in the world,
One wrong click.
one misplaced USB drive,
It's all over.
and we're back to those USB drives again, aren't we?
They're the common thread. But it goes beyond that, right? It's
Yeah.
about training, awareness, being suspicious, thinking twice before you click that link, open that attachment.
It's like a culture of security.
Exactly. Where everyone understands the stakes and they feel empowered to, like, speak up if something seems off.
So technology is important, but
It's only part of the equation.
this has been fascinating, really eye-opening.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, any final thoughts for our listeners? What's the big takeaway here?
Air gaps, they're not these impenetrable fortresses, more like, castles. You got to keep reinforcing the walls, stay vigilant, adapt to new threats.
It's an ongoing process.
Always.
And even in this digital world, it still comes down to people.
100%.
Yeah. Well, on that note, this has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us as we explored the fascinating and sometimes a little scary world of air gap security. Until next time, stay safe out there.